Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of JaianMusic Notes. The next 3 episodes are going to be very unique for me because it's my first time taking archived material from a previous podcast I used to do called Anime Podcasters and resharing them over here in the JaianMusic Notes feed. I am going to be presenting to you for the next 3 episodes a conversation that I've had with Kudus Gordon, friend of the podcast, amazing sound engineer, and I will leave all of Kudus's links in the description, of course. Go check out what Kudus does. It's beyond amazing in audio and in music. We sat down together, and Kudus isn't really someone who watches a lot of anime. I watched a little bit here and there, and we broke down the music of 3 very iconic animes: Attack on Titan, Death Note, and Cowboy Bebop. So I have re-edited and repurposed these episodes for JaianMusic Notes, and I'm very excited to present them to you. Just a quick reminder that the podcast is sponsored by Laser Audio Technologies, so you can go check out all of their amazing music creative effects plugins over there. And if you use code JaianMusic, you get 25% off your purchase. And that goes straight back into the podcast, such as GoPro Kyo, who does all of the artwork for JaianMusic Notes. Furthermore, make sure to go subscribe to JaianMusic Notes in your favorite podcatcher and follow me on social media at JaianMusic. All right, so enjoy this first episode on Cowboy Bebop. Today, I'm here with Kudus Gordon. How are you, Q?
Good evening. Hello, darlings. How are we? How are my levels?
This is the most chemical we'll get, Q, because we're getting into outer space. We're going with probably my favorite podcast for you. Probably the one that I think you are the best equipped for as a non-anime fan.
As a non-anime fan, yet a jazz player.
Yeah.
Ex-jazz player. It doesn't happen a lot these days.
Right.
But like, hey, you know what? Well, it's just like riding a bike, you know? Once you learn how to doodle on them ivories, it never leaves your system, you know?
Right,
your
right,
subconscious. I'm still, like, here's the thing. I've never been in like a pro scenario, but like all those jazz camps that I did when I was a kid, all those like the lessons that I signed up for, I had so many like super advanced people around me that they like their passion kind of like it's infectious, you know? Like they were like urging us to go back and listen to those old records. They were like, you guys learning sheet music, you're learning this, you're learning that. Forget about all that. Just go home, throw on some Miles Davis, and just like learn their solos by ear. And that's how I got good. That was my introduction to jazz. Just talking to guys like Brian Brown, rest in peace, the amazing Brian Brown. He was like one of the legendary Ottawa. We're both from Ottawa. One of the most legendary Ottawa jazz pianists of all time. Learns from Oscar Peterson.
Really?
Living legend. I got to meet him. Super lucky. And so yeah, like I'm really into jazz. I love it. And this is like when you told me we were doing this, I was like, okay, it's called Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah.
It's a very odd title. That was my first impression. I was like, okay, that's
It's odd, but it fits so well with what the anime is. And the thing, before we because we're obviously going to individually break down songs that we enjoyed and everything. This is the only anime soundtrack that I know of where the composer used a band for like most of it. The Seatbelts.
Yeah.
The Seatbelts
I read
and
that,
Yoko Kanno.
What even stranger, even more unusual than that, and I was very surprised to read this because I was scrolling through like the Wikipedia of like the music department, like how that was set up. They had all of the music executed before production on the show itself began.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever even heard of that being a thing before. I've heard of there are pieces of pre-existing music that are intended to be used in the thing,
Right.
But from day one of like writing the script, I've heard of that, but they're pre-existing music. I've never heard of you hire a band, or you don't even hire a band. You create a band for the project itself. You get them to get a bunch of like music down, written, recorded, performed, and then you write with that informing the like creation and the production of the show itself. Do you know of another example?
Like the openings of animes are pre-existing songs. You know what I mean? And those
Definitely, yeah.
do find themselves in the series in like epic moments. So I think that's the closest. But an entire series like that, or mostly like that,
Yeah,
unique.
where they like commissioned a score,
Yeah.
as the first step in the production. Like, yeah, that's very unusual. I know, like there's Baby Driver. You ever see that movie?
No.
That was like he had like a bunch of songs. He's like, I want to use these songs in the script, and that kind of like they did that. They filmed scenes to the rhythms of those songs. It was almost like a music video and a movie became one. So like things like that exist. But all those songs, it was like classic 70s songs, 80s, like they're hits that everybody knows. So when it pops up in a movie, everyone goes, "Oh!" But like this is a wild idea. And as a person who watches things, shows and movies and things, and pays way more attention to the music than I think a typical viewer, because I'm more of a music oriented person than a cinema person. I like that. I like that the score takes such a big chunk of like the essence of the show, and I wish there was more stuff like that, because there's so many just okay shows or just okay movies that I love just on the strength of the music and how well the themes are written. There's so many examples. Like people like to complain about those the Star Wars prequels, like from the 90s and 2000s. People like, oh, those movies, they haven't aged well, the effects are bad, Jar Jar's annoying, blah blah blah. And I agree with all of them. But John Williams, oh my god, like did he not crush the people Duel of Fates? That's the thing that people talk about the most,
Right,
like
right.
in my opinion, amazing soundtrack. It can hold up, like even if you're not that into the thing, it can just hold it up for me.
It can. And I think that the soundtrack for Cowboy Bebop, like it really sets the tone of the anime. How much have you seen of the actual anime itself?
I haven't watched any.
Okay,
I just listen. I just
Interesting,
listen. Yeah,
okay.
I'm going to actually. I don't know how many of the listeners have watched this already, but like, can you like summarize, like just generally explain like the themes, like what the show's about? Because I'm curious as someone who's going in blind.
So the idea of Cowboy Bebop, it's a ragtag team of space bounty hunters.
Okay.
And they fly around space in this spaceship, obviously, where they listen to this news program, and it's like, oh, today's bounty is this, and it starts out with that, where oh, this really popular criminal is escaping, and he was last seen in this area, so they start doing that, and it starts out with Jet and Spike, the two main characters, I would really say, and then they recruit more characters as the series goes along. It's like the series it has a runtime of I think 26 episodes. Don't quote me on that, but it's one set season, right? And
it's a limited series.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's no like it only has a set amount of episodes. There's no season 2. It ends when it ends. You see what I mean?
That's surprising, because when I was looking at the music, there was like 7 albums released of
the music in this series is really a very important chunk of it. I would say it's more important to this series than other series. How important music is for other series. The music is a big deal here, because you have the name of a genre in the actual title, like bebop. Bebop is a music genre. It's a jazz music genre. So jazz is obviously a huge influence in there. And the story, what I want to say, which is really cool, is every episode feels like its own unique episode. There's like very little connective tissue. The bad guy of the episode is the bad guy of the episode. There's like
it's very like
reoccurring villains a little bit here and
okay.
there, but like for the most part, like it's very episodic, which I personally really enjoyed.
I missed that. I missed that a little bit. You ever watch old TV and you realize, oh, you can drop in anywhere in the show, any season, any random episode. You can just drop in, watch an episode, and be like, oh, that was great. I knew what was happening, and then just head out again. There was like a shift. Like you got to blame HBO for this, right? There was a shift, and as great as these shows were, The Sopranos and Breaking Bad and stuff like that, it was just like, we're gonna have these long season arcs where it's like one big long story told in chunks, instead of just like little stories that are fully wrapped by the end of the episode. 25 minutes long, and then or 22 minutes long, and you've resolved all of the conflicts have been wrapped up. You know what I mean? And I think people, while that's not the norm anymore, I think people kind of miss that, because it is less of a commitment to take on a show. You can just just throw on an episode of The Simpsons. You can just watch any random episode.
Right. No, absolutely. But thinking more about like the actual music itself, we got to start with Tank. We got to start
with Tank.
Tank is the opening to the series, a super upbeat piano. I missed I mixed in the piano and jazz piece.
And it sounded like your own name somehow.
Yeah,
You're just
exactly.
Like,
Everything
the
it all
introductions
comes
are
back
done,
to the music on this channel, guys. All these songs have been covered. You can find them link in the description.
Oh dang!
It's just,
That's how promo never
you gotta
stops.
spin it any way you can, bro. But in all seriousness, this track slaps so hard and really sets like the energy of like, okay, this is action. There's a lot of action in this anime. There's a lot of fighting, and this, like, what were your first impressions when you just hear that like bass guitar starting to like riff on?
You know what? This is very specific, and I'm not sure if everyone is going to relate to this when I say this.
Just say.
My first impression when I first started it is that it not just musically but visually looks like an old 1970s blaxploitation film. You ever watch those? Like
No, I
those Pam
didn't.
Grier movies from the 70s? It's like Foxy Brown. You know that film?
No.
Okay, anyone who's listening to this who's intimately familiar with the opening of Cowboy Bebop, just go on like YouTube and type in like Foxy Brown opening title sequence, or you know what I mean, title credits, and you'll exactly know like where this aesthetic comes from. It's like if you haven't seen that, you know Archer, you know that show Archer?
Yes, I do.
You know that kind of like there's like fast bongo playing, there's an upright bass going like it's like it's like it has this like cool swagger to it, this like jazzy verse, but kind of like some Latin flavor in there, and that's contrasted with like the visuals are like contrast colors, you know, like silhouettes. Everything's silhouettes. There's like dancing, and like the backdrop is just like one like completely uniform color, and then you're like dancing in front of it. It's very like striking, and it goes perfectly with the music. You know, like it's a very specific aesthetic, and it's like. And I love it. You know, like I think James Bond too. That's a very common. I think that's Archer is obviously just based on James Bond, but like that's a very like specific time and place of culture that they're referencing. So hearing that the show you're talking about sci-fi, space, western, noir, like they call it neo noir, you know, is such a bizarre. It's like which is like we're throwing two different worlds that have like very. Two different worlds that have very little connection, and we're just like throwing them together. Not even like gently or like subtly, but they're just like boldly. You know what I mean? It's like they're leaning into the fact that we're just like gonna take two random things. You know, let's just bring them into the same room together.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything else that has. It's a bold decision.
It is a bold decision. I agree. It's a bold decision. The other thing too that I feel with this track is very adventurous feeling. Like I just really feel like it lets you know that you're going on an adventure. You're going out into space. You're going out to like hunt. You're going out on a bounty. The upbeat energy of that track really made me feel like it said that. I don't want to reuse the same words here, but like the same tone of it. It really showed like what the energy was going to be like of like we're going after like we're going on a hunt here. We're going after it, which I really liked. I really enjoyed that part of it.
It's great. Like I mean, the job of like an opening sequence is it's supposed to draw you in, right?
Drawn.
And I think that
And I was drawn, bro. Drawn.
You were drawn.
I was drawn.
You were drawn
by GoPro Kyo.
like
He's
one of the
available
French girls
for commission. Literally. Link in the description. We'll hire GoPro Kyo.
Okay, so yeah, opening. It seems it seems to take a lot of inspiration from like I already said James Bond. You know, like 60s cinema. Like remember that the old like the original Mission Impossible show. Know that music? That's exactly right in the same. Like,
I think that's a good comparison. Yeah,
so many bongos.
A lot of bongos. Bongos are the best.
Is there anything that hypes you up for like some kind of like detective story more than like rapid bongos? You just hear that and you're like, oh, I'm in. It just tells you
Fair
it's
enough.
like a perfect. It's a very like specific connection.
What
Like if people don't know what we're talking, it's probably like young listeners. It's a '60s show. I don't blame people for like missing that. But like think like Incredibles. Remember the music from the Incredibles?
Of course.
Exact set. Like totally inspired from that exact same.
Very inspired.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, what are some other aspects
Michael Giacchino
of the opening that you wanted to like maybe bring to light?
The opening, it's got okay. So what I didn't want to note that I did take on it. It's got this. I'm not sure who the producer was. We already shouted out the band name. It was the Seatbelts, right?
Yeah, composer was Yoko Kanno.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, I'm talking specifically about the production. It's very they really nailed that like vintage approach to recording. When you listen to this and they're like, oh wow, there's tons of room tone in those brass shots.
Yes,
when
there
they're
are.
with that bop bop, like
You feel the room.
they, like by the 70s, like Brecker Brothers records, stuff like that. They were a lot more into close miking, a lot
Yeah.
more into like, and it's understandable because now you're going from 8 tracks where you're like, oh god, how do we take this big band, this jazz, and compress them all into like a small set of tracks? Now you have options. Now you can
you gotta
expand.
do a lot of mic summing if you do that.
You can get, the more mics, the less room tone you're gonna get because you can. Hey, we have 48 channels now. We can individually
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
give everyone their own
Multi-track.
You don't have to
Love
just like
multi-track.
hang one Omni mic over the whole room and just if the singer's too quiet, just yell louder. Like because there's no options.
Self-mix yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the drummer's like, my kick, I can't like hear it very well on the record. It's like, well, hit it harder, idiot. Like they had just no, there was just no mixing back in those days. It was just like, it was like performance straight to master. Like that's essentially when you're limited to like 2 or 4 channels. So, so I love hearing stories from like that era of recording too, because they literally just, what was mixing? It was just telling the trumpet player to like stop hitting those notes so hard. Like that's all you could. There's no fader to do that, right? So very different era of recording, and they really captured that. Like the drum tone too. I was listening to that and I was like, this sounds like this was done with like 2 mics on the drums. Just like way backed, way
They
far
did a
away.
lot of because I don't know if I told you this. There's a live action version of Cowboy Bebop that came out like recently. In the last,
That was like a spin-off.
like just a live action version of the anime series. It did not so good in terms of the rating, but the original composer and I think her band came back in to like do some scoring for it.
Well, yeah, you gotta.
And we saw a little bit of like the in studio vibe of it, and I remember like being like, oh, that's like the miking techniques in there were very like not many microphones on the bongos and like on the different types of setup. So I think there's something to that where like you want to recreate that audio setup of
100%.
the recording. So I definitely like see what you mean by that.
Did you spot a lot of ribbon mics? There's probably so many.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were they like were they going authentic? Like they're on like an actual tape machine and an actual.
The thing is, you only see like it's like in the making of, and you only see the visuals of it, and it's there like like when they do those little sliding shots of like, oh, this is what the symbol looks like, so you can pause and kind of see and peek. As an audio nerd, as you should, But man, the opening.
It's strange to watch like footage of like an orchestra or a band or something with a conductor in the room rolling like this music, like the score, because they just have like this giant projector showing the movie, and then the conductor is just keeping an eye on the screen, looking at the sheet music and looking at the orchestra, and then like just juggling all 3.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's a challenge. I think as a conductor, because like you already have so many balls in the air as a conductor of just like an orchestra. They're performing a Brahms piece. You're already thinking about all these. You have like 80 musicians at your fingertips, and you have to sort of like keep things like all these different things in mind. So you're recording the score for something, at least in the way they did it in the old school, like pre-digital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what this show is mimicking.
Yeah.
Now you have the added aspect of like you got to keep an eye on the screen and be like, this shot, this little like string like hit has to line up with like this edit that's happening. Like there's so many specific things that you have to like be ready for. It's like you have to have this movie totally internalized by the time that you're doing that, executing that.
No, you do
recording.
And then like outside of maybe the opening track, what are some other like standout songs that you wanted to break down a little bit here?
I had one more thing on the opening.
For sure. Go ahead.
I had one more thing in the opening. That the sound that they had going for at that point is like it's a type of funk that's very specific to like 70s Brecker Brothers records, like James Brown type funk.
Right.
And what was interesting to me and kind of surprising is that they had underneath like all the layers, all the horns, all the weird chords, all the dissonance, all of these shots and lines that are just like really executed with like so much precision and complexity. Underneath all of that, it's essentially just a 12 bar blues structure. I don't know if you picked up on that, but like if you
No,
just
tell me more.
if you just like listen to if you were to just like simplify those chords down to like straight sevenths and just like play them out on a piano, it would play like 12 bar blues. They've just added so much. It's like they put like a hat on a hat on a hat with those chords, and they're so like rich. So it departs away from that blues sound. But if you just boil it down to like the actual harmonic structure, that's essentially what it is. Which was surprising to me because like the sound that they had going for like the era that they were evoking funk wise had kind of like departed that like harmonic tradition.
Yeah.
Like and there is legit old school blues in the soundtrack. Like we heard some songs. They really hop around to like a lot of different eras of jazz. They had like songs that sounded like some 1930s like Mississippi blues, like Robert Johnson just harmonica guitar, like some really really crusty old sounding blues music, all the way up to like like Brecker Brothers 70s funk. So there's like a 40-year chunk of like, I guess most would say like the golden era of jazz, like 20s to like 60s, I would say. That's a really big, it's funny because music genres like they come and go so fast nowadays that it's odd to think of a time where like your parents' music and your music, like those two generations, are not drastically different. Now it's like night and day, where you like you listen to music 5 years ago, and it still sounds like it's from a different planet from music now. But back then it was like, pre-internet, pre-digital anything. Trends came and went much slower.
Right.
So anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but yeah, I love that intro. It's probably my favorite part. Those that near the ending, you remember those like dissonant horns?
Of course.
That like just like
Bow, bow.
guy. Those are yummy. Like
Yummy.
That's
Yummy is
the
a good
type
word
of-
for it.
That's the type of harmony that I love in this genre, where it's just like you can't even guess with like even someone who's pretty experienced. You're like, is that like an augmented 13th? What the heck is going on there? Such a rich like. Oh yeah, I mean I find that stuff really really satisfying. It's a bit. I understand if people react to it like it's a bit abrasive, but like once you kind of get like into that mode, into that aesthetic, that it's addictive. It's so good.
Addictive is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had for the opening. It's like I really hope my hope is that there's a whole generation of anime fans, like fans of the show, who know nothing about jazz or funk or bop or anything like that. They get turned on to the genre. You know what I mean? From like listening to it, because that has a it tends to happen a lot. Like if people were talking about like Stranger Things, they used a Metallica song. All of a sudden, all these kids who weren't even born are like, oh, what the heck is that? Like, and they're discovering like, their dad's music. They're just like going way back and checking this stuff out. And if it's enough of a hit, it just this old 45-year-old song just pops back into the Hot 100, pops into the charts. They're like, what is this old song doing that? Oh, there's just a bunch of kids. I think it's obviously the youngest generation that drives the most traffic of like what's a hit song, what's on the charts right now.
They definitely have a great influence.
So all that to say, I really hope that happens with this show, because like jazz is great. It's like
it will not, because the live action did not. The live action was that opportunity to like really introduce, like like throwing it up on Netflix. Everyone's got a Netflix account. A lot of people have a Netflix account, and the music there with the original composer and the Seatbelts, like we really had like an opportunity, but it just didn't. It didn't pan out, and that's unfortunate. But it's part of life. I want to talk about, what do you know about the real folk blues?
The real folk blues. Oh, the first closer.
One of the first closers. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This one took me aback for a minute, because it was such a it's such a departure from the rest of the soundtrack, and there's a lot of hopping, like I said, between like one decade and the other.
There's
in terms of like the
too much
evolution
hopping
of
for my
jazz.
brain to understand in the music for this series.
Right. Well, I mean, it was interesting for me. Like, it makes me kind of want to watch the show
Oh, you should.
because I will watch the show. Reading like the summary on Wikipedia, it was bizarre because it was like, oh, it's a neo noir, sci-fi, western, vintage. It was like, what are like those three things?
What are
so it's
you
like
saying, Wiki?
Blade
What are you
Runner
saying?
meets Firefly meets Star Trek. What are you saying right now?
Right.
It's like western in space. That's been done. Neo noir in space. That's been done. Like, you know, but like all three, like sci-fi,
Right.
western.
So going back to the
noir.
real folk blues, I think to me it felt poignant. It just felt like it just here's your melody. Here's your next note. Here's your rhythm.
Well, it's darker than
It's darker.
It's darker than the rest of the music.
Oh, it's so dark, but it's gritty and it's got this like vibe of like, we'll see you on the next one. See you later, Space Cowboy.
Makes
Or
you want to click on the next, right? Like, would you call the show like? Is it like a bingeable like cliffhanger ending type show? And that's when they hit you with that music.
It definitely has some cliffhanger episodes, which actually, this would be the perfect jumping point for another song I want to talk about.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we can talk about it. Hop back.
Okay, we'll hop back to Real Folk Blues in a second. There is a song called Greenbird.
Greenbird.
I don't think we listened to it today when you came in here, but this song, I have notes here. I want to like, so it's
talk about Greenbird.
instrumental piece that has like this dream quality to it, and it's got this like introspection vibe to it. It marks the ending of a very significant episode, and you just have like it's like this like these choral voices singing one after the other, and it's like happening in this very slow-mo moment, and I really enjoyed like just the textures of all the voices coming together, and there's like a little bit of piano in there that really like meshes it all together, and it's one of those few anime soundtracks that I really feels like it involves like it brings. You can feel the character's emotions more because you can see the regret in the eyes of the character as the song occurs, and you can also feel the nostalgia of what Spike goes through. I'm going to get a little bit into the story without spoiling here. Spike has some regrets, as any main character should. And Greenbird is one of those songs where you can really go into the dimension a little bit more profoundly and just understand like what's really messing with you, what's really bothering you. And, you know, Spike is also a big risk taker. And there's one scene in this entire anime that I won't spoil, but Greenbird being a soft track and the moment it's attached to is so opposite. But it meshes so well the two elements together. So I just wanted to like sidestep into that for a minute. But going back to
100%, I love it when I watched this video who's like it was made by a music analyst, and he's talking about when songs get used in shows and movies. And he said something that blew my mind a little bit, but as soon as I heard it, I was like, that is so true. He was basically what will grab someone's attention and really make something kind of memorable is when you have a contradiction.
Yes.
When it's an unexpected choice, that makes way more sense. Like the musical decision as like a supervisor, whoever's making that call, that will pass right through you is when you go, okay, there's a sad moment in this show. Let's find a sad song and put it there. That's like kind of a typical. But when you make some kind of contradictory decision, where like Tarantino talking about Reservoir Dogs, where he's like, it's a torture scene. What am I gonna do? Stuck in the middle with you. Upbeat song, fun, and what happens to your brain when you're watching a really grim torture scene play out with a really upbeat like summer jam? It makes it creepier.
It makes it worse.
It makes it
better.
So, yeah, exactly. It's a contradictory musical choice.
Yes.
Makes it memorable.
Yes.
So it sounds like that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah,
where it's like,
it was very contradictory.
Yeah.
But also it fit. It's weird. It's really weird.
Yeah, I like bold, like strange decisions like that.
Absolutely,
because
bold,
that's
bo-
what will
bold,
stick with
bold
you.
decision to make. But I wonder if this song was really about the seatbelts. I don't think this specific one was.
Well, I think there was a few,
That
there's like a few groups in that. I think the Seatbelts did like the bulk of it, but when I was reading, it was like they were putting some other names in there.
Yeah,
I
there
was
were
like,
other
oh,
names.
okay, it's like
That's what I recall.
an
Yeah.
ensemble of, like different sort of groups working together.
Absolutely. But going back to the Real Folk Blues, what are some other details you wanted to like highlight about that track?
Oh yeah, first thing that popped up in my head, mainly when not in the very very start,
Yeah.
but when the guitar kicks in, I was like, this sounds like something that like Soundgarden would do.
That's good. Yeah.
It just jumped straight into like the 90s.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I was getting ready for like some kind of thing that would fit in with like the rest of the music.
Right.
But as a credits thing, I guess you want that to stick out a bit.
Yeah.
Like you said, cliffhangery type of ending. You want like a bit of a left hook, like a left turn.
Right.
On the credits theme. So it was interesting that they went in that direction. And it's more specifically than Soundgarden, like, do you remember Chris Cornell wrote a Bond theme for 2006, the Casino Royale remake?
Okay.
Do you remember that song?
Not off the top of my head, but I know like who you're talking about and what movie you're talking about. So I'm trying to like get. But anyways, what point are you trying to get at here?
That it sounds a lot like
It
Real
sounds
Folk
like that.
Blues.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It sounds a lot like Real Folk Blues, and I don't think it was intentional. It's not like, oh, the melody sounds the same. It's just like more of it reminds me of it.
Yeah. Speaking of like songs that sound the same, I don't know. Like this is just like for the viewers more, but there's one song on this anime.
That's our second Bond connection. I just realized.
Pardon me.
That's our second Bond connection.
We're gonna go for 4 at least.
Oh, okay.
We gotta
okay,
double
hit
up, bro. Always. Okay. There's one song called "Bad the Dog No Biscuits." It's a bluesy song with a lot like with a lot of, sorry, I was gonna say harmonica. Like electric guitar, and it's used in like in fights and like when the mood gets like a bit dark in the series. I listened to that song and immediately, you know what the first thing I thought of was?
What?
You will never guess this.
Okay.
I thought of the Budokai Dragon Ball games. This song is in Dragon Ball games. And I was like, what's going on here? Or if it's not, a very, very similar songs in the Dragon Ball series. And I this is a rabbit hole I think is worth digging into, but I think there might be some things where like composers are, if it's not the same song, it's like 100% they copied off this song.
Or, like it was similar enough that you were like, oh, this can't be.
It really is like.
Oh, explain what it is. You said it's a
It's
game.
got this like bouncy drum beat to it where it's like a slappy, like a hat snare, and it's got like a good consistent BPM. It's like dot 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 dot. So you're kind of always swinging with it, and you got some cool brass and some guitar twang at the same time, and you kind of just feel like because like the fights in Cowboy Bebop are a bit dancey. Like sometimes the kick is like a really looping kick. Like it looks like you're about to do like a spin. More. You see what I mean?
It sounds like you're describing like some kind of ska, like. Yeah, you said like bouncy drums, like
yeah.
Okay,
maybe ska. I would not disagree. But just all to say that in the Dragon Ball Budokai games, these are games that are like on the PS2 queue. So this is like
this is way back.
Way back. The Budokai series.
Would this be like contemporary with Cowboy Bebop, like the animated show itself?
Well, the show came out in the 90s, so it's like it's around there. It's around there.
Okay.
And specifically, this song is used when you play in the tournament mode of Dragon Ball Budokai. So I wonder if there must have been some sort of copying or something, like, or it's the same song. That's yeah.
You just made me realize something. That it's so appropriate that it would be being released in the 90s, because I just said that credits theme just hit me with like a grungy, like Soundgarden feeling, like a Chris Cornell type.
Yeah, like you were saying.
I just realized that absolutely fits with that time frame.
That time frame, it does.
But as for the song, being like one inspired the other and stuff like that, what I've noticed, and the more stuff that I hear and have a eureka moment like you had, where you're like, wait a minute, that's exactly like this other thing.
Yeah.
The more I suspect like a temp music scenario. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Where like, and this is something that a lot of composers
Tempitis.
they'll complain about it. And I think one of the most vocal, I guess you could say, like anti-temp music composers is Danny Elfman. He's really vocal about it interfering with the type of the creative process.
Yeah, I actually
he has an old school approach.
No,
to
absolutely.
writing.
I when in my film music studies, this is a lot of my teachers would tell me that like temp music is one of two things. If your first temp song is like a piano piece and like with some strings, you're like, okay, you'll be safe. But like if your temp piece is like, I don't know, like
some specific,
some really
where
specific like high band, it's like you can't compete with that. Like you're screwed.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Like if your temp piece is like Radiohead,
yeah. It's like, what are you gonna do? Just like make it something
it's
better.
over.
Yeah.
It's over, bro.
Yeah, you just got to call Radiohead and be like, "Can you guys just redo your own music and it's something else, so that you don't get sued by yourself?"
I love Radiohead, but anyways,
I love Radiohead. So that's what's interesting. And for anyone, we should probably explain like exactly what temp music is. Just
please
in
go
case
ahead.
It's not clear. So essentially, back in the day when they were making stuff pre-computer, era, they were you just make the thing. You just make the movie, the show, and it's musicless. And you might, as a director, you might have ideas. You're like, I think we should go in this direction with music, and you have that discussion with whoever's scoring your piece, right?
Right.
And that was just done. So it gives the composer a lot of leeway and a lot of a lot of room to make their own decisions in terms of what, like, they'll obviously sit down with the director, talk about what the expectations are, but ultimately they are writing it from scratch. As they'll watch the show and they'll be like, what should go under this scene? And then they'll write, the music along to it. So that's the way it was done. And then once digital editing programs are invented, I guess like 90s, this would start becoming a thing. And now it's obviously everything's 100% digital.
Right.
There's very, very few analog filmmakers left, but it does happen,
Yeah.
Now, this gives directors and editors and stuff the power to just grab any random song that they like, and they're like, well, I know that this song, either specifically or this general type of song, wants to inspire this part, like this chunk, this scene.
Right.
So they can just drag it, pop it into the timeline, and now you're jumping several steps closer to the final product, which always feels good when you're editing, because it's a long time that it is pretty unwatchable, and you're watching these dailies and you're like, okay, I mean, like, his acting seems good, there's nothing else there, there's no Foley, there's no like post processing on the colors, there's no music, there's no nothing, so you're just using your imagination. You're like, okay, I think it'll work once all the pieces are there. But now that you can just throw the song in, you don't have to do all that mental labor of like picture it as a final thing. I think it'll feel good. You can just be like, well, here's how it plays with the song.
Right.
So it's a helpful tool. But when the movie or the show is finished and you just call your composer, present it to them, and be like, here's what we got. You've now muted all of your temp music.
Yeah.
The composer will come up with something, show it to the director or the editor, and they might go, I don't know, like, I'm just so used to hearing it with the temp music now. They can't divorce those two things.
Tempitis.
The music, tempitis. That's it, the music and the visuals have now been married in the head of the director.
Yeah.
So
it's the same thing as demoitis.
Demoitis. It's a very common thing. Like, it's not so much that it's better this way. It's just that I'm just used to it that way at this point. So when the composer comes in with new music, you're like, it just doesn't feel like the way I'm used to anymore, because I've seen this play out with the temps.
It makes me think
so many
of
times.
a story I heard. I don't remember what film it was, but apparently, this is really a bad story. But
Okay.
This one composer, and then we'll get back into Bebop. But I think it's
related.
Yeah, it's related. This one composer was dealing with, it was like a big film, like I think it was a DreamWorks film or something. I could be wrong. But the director was like very like tempoitis to the max. And then finally the composer, like, they meet a halfway point where like they get rid of all the temp music and they put all of like the music that the composer made, and like it was like months and months and months and months and like sleepless nights, like a lot of work went into it. The composer goes to the premiere. All of the music is the temp music.
Oh no!
All of the music, all of his original music was removed, and apparently, when he realized that, as he watched it, he had like a physical reaction, like some sort, like I don't know if he seizured or something, but like the guy got like physically ill, and I had to be removed from the premiere.
Wow.
They didn't tell him.
It's understandable because like you spend so much time, effort.
Oh my gosh,
blood, sweat, and tears.
That
this
is,
thing, and then they just scrapped it. Yeah,
I've had multiple moments where like my music got scrapped from a film or something. Oh, we're just gonna do all fully instead, and it's like it sucks, but it's part of the.
That's part of.
But like that's the roughest. Version of it.
When music just gets cut in favor of silence, I think that as upsetting as it is, you just got to take that.
Oh yeah,
it's like, you know what?
You're not the soundtrack, you know? Like you have to separate yourself from the soundtrack. It's your creation. It's not you personally.
You're at the service of the final product ultimately, right? And there was this one thing that I really liked that the director
Watanabe for Cowboy Bebop, the director for Cowboy Bebop is Watanabe. He's amazing. He's like one of a kind, and he was also involved in the live action.
Darren Aronofsky, the director, something that he said on this topic that I really liked, which is he made a movie called Mother.
Okay.
And it was a polarizing movie, but one thing about it is that there's not one note of music in the whole film.
That's cool.
And it's an experimental movie. It's not unheard of, but the terrible part of it is. Exactly like you're talking about, they did hire a composer and they listened to the music and they said the music is great, we're not going to use any of it. And of course the composer was kind of bummed about that. He was like, oh man, like they used it in the trailers, even like they were using it in the marketing, but it just didn't make it into the final cut. And Darren Aronofsky, his perspective was basically like he did his job and he's still part of this movie because we didn't know that we wanted silence until we heard a scored version of the scene.
That's fair.
You know what I mean? Like he still contributed. And I was like, oh, that's such a great perspective because it kind of validates the composer when they're in a scenario that their music has been scrapped.
It doesn't matter what the journey is as long as you get to the wanted destination.
Yeah. And I really hope that like once in a while it'll happen where some like an Alien, this happened too. Like Jerry Goldsmith wrote all this amazing music and then Ridley Scott was just like, I just like silence in this part. Like I just want it to be nothing. It's not like the music was wrong. It's just that the right decision is silence. And some of it got picked up and used in different projects later on. Like so you get a hold of this piece. To talk about Tarantino again, he got a hold of an unused piece from The Thing, like the 80s movie The Thing. And I think he loved it because he loves that composer, and he's like, they never used this, and so he put it in his new movie. So it's like 40 years after this music was cut, it got used, and it's like, how beautiful is that?
It's the same thing when I make an anime cover and I'll post it on Spotify, and it'll go like months with getting like 12 streams.
Yeah,
and then like randomly it'll shoot up to like 800 streams in a day.
It happens.
It just happens like that. That's what it is. Like that's why I think it's important to like just keep making it. But I want to get back here to this. There's like 2-3 more soundtracks that I really want to get into this episode because I just love them so much. The first one is called Memory. I don't know if we didn't listen to it as well today, but this one is another one it's probably the closest one to Greenbird, where it's just like very twinkly,
like has that dreamy quality.
Yeah. There's no like big drums or anything. It's just like very vibey bells, reverberant.
Yeah.
And it's got this evocative feeling where you feel like an emotional charge when you listen to it. And I think it's in a minor key from what I can tell. Because it's really feeling melancholic when you listen to it. Like to me, it kind of becomes about the reverberation at some point, because it kind of like just becomes part of the piece. You know, when you will use a synth, and then just like the delay is now part of the music. Like, I feel like the reverberation, the sprinkle of it,
totally
became part of the piece. So yeah, like,
and it's also unusual in jazz music that production elements like delays become such an integral part.
Yeah,
of
but
the music.
I would venture to say this is not a jazz piece.
Oh, okay. It's kind of
Definitely not a
diverse.
jazz piece. That's what's cool about Cowboy Bebop. Like you will have super jazzy pieces, and then you'll have pieces like Memory there are not. There's another one where, how do I say this one without? There's a piece called Goodnight Julia, or Goodbye Julia. I'm not sure which one it is, but it's got like this really. It's another instrumental piece with like a really mournful vibe to it. Very I wouldn't even say seductive, but I would just say like you're listening to it and you're just like, oh, what's going on here? Like,
and like an intriguing.
Yeah. So like these different pieces from Cowboy Bebop, what they do so well is that it's gonna be a Death Note meme, Cube. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say the word.
Hey, well, now I know what it is.
Atmospheric.
Atmospheric.
It's atmospheric, Q.
That's what it does.
This soundtrack has atmospheric elements, just like Death Note and just like Attack on Titan.
There is, like there. Especially, you were talking about mallets earlier, like bells, so kind of vibraphones. There does exist jazz music that it has that dreamy atmospheric quality. And if people, I want to say something to the listeners. If people are a fan of this soundtrack and are kind of like intrigued by the sounds in there, where it opens your eyes to like, oh, I didn't know jazz could take on that specific type of emotion. Listen to this old '60s Ornette Coleman album, "The Shape of Jazz to Come." It's so evocative of that exact like there's wistful kind of like it has a dark quality to it that you don't like if you ask someone just a layperson who has no interest or knowledge of jazz what's the first thing that comes to mind. They'll probably say Christmas because Christmas music and jazz, it's just like all of the favorite Christmas records that people listen to usually come from a time when pop music was swing. You know, it was like the Benny Goodman 40s type of records. And I think that people still have that sort of jazz Christmas connection. So when you say jazz to someone, they think, oh, you know, like pleasant, warm, backgroundy, kind of like you can have dinner with it in the background, that type of music. But that's the critical piece, the intriguing piece of jazz that they're missing is that there is a strain of jazz music, and I'm talking about Mingus, I'm talking about Ornette Coleman, I'm talking about Miles Davis. Like there's a string of like darker jazz music that's more associated with like it's very connected to like social justice, civil rights. It's dark music. Like it has its roots in the blues. Blues is music of like suffering. You know, it has a soulful quality to it that like I think that when people say jazz is boring, I think that's the piece that would pull them in.
Right.
That's the thing that would hook them. That's escaping them. Yeah. Is that like it does have like a heaviness to it.
Right.
If you find the right thing.
Right.
You know, people think like, oh, you know, like light, easy listening. Let me tell you, there's some jazz records that are sobering. Like that have like that heaviness to them. So like, and Cowboy Bebop is not all using stuff like that, but it dabbles. Like it'll dabble in.
But
like
it has to dabble. It has to dabble because to me, if you just did like a straight jazz thing, even though jazz is a very multi-layered genre of music, you know, it's that meme where like, oh, you made a mistake on that key. No, it's jazz.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Jazz is just an excuse to justify mistakes.
Yeah. But you know,
that's usually something like classical folks. Snobby classical folks say that about jazz.
All that to say that if this series was just all straight jazz, it wouldn't. At least the biggest difference to me would be the big emotional impacts. The big moments would not be the same. Yeah. You need tracks like Memory, Goodnight Julia. You need tracks like Green Bird. They're super useful and they're super supportive of the storyline. And they, even though the tank sets the tone, they set an undertone, like the underscore. We talk about underscore a lot here. Yeah, you know. So absolutely. What are
we were talking about the time that this came out.
Yeah,
and that's an interesting thing because speaking of you know, a show comes out or a movie comes out that's a big hit and sparks this interest in an old tradition of music in younger people. This came out in the 90s, and I'm very curious as to what the cause and effect is here. Because, you know, Swing Kids, you know that movie?
No.
It was a movie that took place in like 1930s like Nazi occupied Germany, and it was
Okay.
like these secret swing clubs where they listen to like jazz music, they dance, all these dance where you're like you're picking
okay.
your girl up, you're throwing her in the air, you catch her, it's very like athletic type,
Okay.
active type of swing
Yeah,
dancing.
yeah.
And that movie was such a hit that there was a bit of a swing revival in the 90s.
Because of it.
Yeah, because of that movie, that people say like there's a few
Interesting.
different sources, like kind of reasons why that specific era of like 30s, 40s dance music had a revival
Right.
in the 90s. But Cowboy Bebop is coming out right at that, like the peak of that
Right.
swing revival. And I'm very curious as to, like, that's what I mean by the cause and effect. I was like, was jazz music chosen as an aesthetic because of the resurgence, or was the resurgence part of what made this show that is incidentally jazzy
Right.
so popular?
Right.
Like which one came first? Like it was like a chicken or the egg thing. Yeah, are you familiar with like kind of like how it was received at the time?
Well,
Like,
I'm getting more familiar as you're describing it to me. This is really like interesting, like how it. But how does that go back to bebop exactly? Is what I'm trying to get back to like just to understand like how do we get here?
Bebop is sorry, I go on.
No,
a lot of
it's all good.
tangents.
It's all good.
That's just
It's
how my
interesting.
brain-
I'm just trying to like connect the.
Bebop-
It's very episodic, like bebop.
There you go.
Where you can listen. This is the type of podcast you could just listen 50 minutes into, and then like,
Exactly.
You don't even
You
start-
just pop in. Like, listen, if you're bored with any story that I'm telling, don't worry. I'll be on to something else in the next 30 seconds. That's how my ADD brain goes. But
go
anyway,
ahead.
so a bebop is essentially when you say bebop, like first thing that pops to mind is like super fast saxophone
Yeah.
lines, like
Tank.
it's not anyone's introduction to jazz because it's so it's not easy listening. It's usually musicians that are into that
Right.
pace of jazz.
Right.
But I think bebop grew out of the type of swing music that I was talking about earlier,
Mhm.
that kids were dancing to
Right.
back in that day, back in that era. Bebop was them taking that music, that old swing music, and saying, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll turn up the tempo. We'll turn like to like a, it's no longer danceable really. Like bebop is like, it has like it's you can tap your foot to it, but if you try to dance to it, you would like you tie your legs into a pretzel. Like it's very like overwhelmingly fast, like a train that's barely on the rails. And it has that kind of like excitement and intensity to it, and I think that's kind of the appeal to me, where like solos, you listen to a solo and it's just like a minute and a half of like straight 16th notes. They're just like ripping, and that's bebop. And I know the show is called that, but really it has all range of like
It has
eras and types of subgenres and
like
cultures.
yeah, exactly. Like I was saying earlier, okay, now we're full circle here. Like I was saying, like if this show was just straight jazz, it wouldn't be the same. And okay,
Exactly.
got it. Yeah, we're getting close to the 1 hour mark here. Q, is there other tracks you wanted to like kind of get into before?
My only note here that I haven't touched on is Chameleon.
Okay, tell me about that.
The old Herbie Hancock,
Yeah.
classic 70s funk.
Yeah,
I don't remember the name of the song, so I apologize, but one of those tunes is literally Chameleon. It's literally like I heard that exact.
they copied the Dragon Ball games. Copying Chameleon. Like, what are we doing here, man?
What's going on, lads?
Seatbelts.
We got some tempoitis.
We're gonna
on
put you in a
our hands, babe.
seatbelt. We're gonna question this.
Yeah. Honestly, like I know it's a very gray area between a tribute or homage versus like a theft, And I at no point listening to this music was like, oh, a theft has occurred. Like,
No.
Call your lawyers. No, I think they're what do they call it? Wearing your influences on your sleeve. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I always approve when people do that because there's an honesty to that.
Absolutely.
And I do that in my own music. Whenever I make something, I think that if I just show it to someone, they'll immediately go, "Oh, this is exactly like oh, you just like took that James Blake aesthetic." And I'm like, "Oh, totally I did." But I like to think that I put your own kind of like personality in there, your own spin on it.
Right.
That's all that you need to do.
Okay, cool. Fair enough. But Q, you said it perfectly right there. Speaking of your own music, if people listen to this mini series and they were maybe on only this episode, they need to go back and listen to the first two, obviously. But if people want to find out more about you, what are we doing? What link am I clicking? What's your at? Like, do you have a website? Like, where can people find you, man?
I'm on YouTube. There's not much on there right now, but I'm going to be more active there. Coming a lot of cool stuff coming soon. It's just my name. It's just Caduce Gordon, Quddus.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of Caduce Gordons out there, so you search that. My thing will be.
If there's any Gordon family about to give birth, do not name. Do not.
Yeah.
Do not.
I'm the only Q.
Okay.
That's the rule.
Well, Q, I just want to say a big thank you to you, man. It's great to Q and I started out on another podcast, Soundspace, and then now that we're not doing that anymore and we're hopping on to here. I've always wanted to keep like making podcasts and like talking to you and picking your brain about music and sound. And this is a really cool like halfway point of like anime and music and audio, and like this is the kind of stuff that I just big thank you.
Totally, man. Love our talks
for sure. So I don't know. Maybe we'll do more music talks in the future, next year, or the year after. We'll see. We'll see how this does. We'll see how we feeling about it. No pressure, no commitments.
I'm still finishing Death Note, so you gotta give me time to catch up. 'Cause here's what happens: is you invite me to like, just talk about this anime, just listen to some of the soundtrack, talk about your thoughts on it,
and then you fall in love with the anime.
And then it just like piques, my curiosity enough to be like, oh man, I have a list, man. I have a list of like everyone keeps telling me, oh, but you haven't seen this? What? You haven't seen that? So I'll throw it on the list, but it's getting freaking long, man. Like I need to
honestly, if you do finish Death Note and you want to come back on and talk about it, that's I would do that episode anytime.
Like not even just the music, like just the show itself.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like you've done like a few episodes on it already.
All right, cool, man. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and bye, guys.
Bye.
All right, so that was my conversation with Caduce. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to stick around because next week we're going to be talking about even more anime music coming down the pipe very soon.